Hey, this is Ryan Croton of the More Than Velocity podcast. Listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up this podcast today into small parts. I want you to digest our guest, and I don't want you to watch this for 30 seconds and come off of it, because I'm telling you right now, the person that we have on this podcast is a go-to guy for me. I don't have many go-to guys in the industry. I mean, Bodie, yeah, he's one. Ben Brewster, he's one. Brent Porciao, he's one. There's a host of others. Randy Sullivan, I got to name him. But this guy who I'm about to introduce, Mike Killian, is the most versatile person, doesn't matter, baseball or outside of the game, that I've met. Former software engineer, he's an athletic trainer. He's also a pitching guru. I know people hate this word, but he's a guru to me. He's teaching me things. And he's been using our product, and I kept thinking to myself, man, we gotta hit this and talk about him and the things he's doing. And I'm gonna let him speak a little bit about his background, but I'm gonna tell you where we're at. We've had conversations back and forth, and everybody in the competitive sport industry needs a niche, and Mike is like the arm whisperer. It's like a horse. You take a horse after they've broken their leg, and you got to send them to like a special person that can re-educate the horse to be able to race again, and this is Mike. Mike is a master at working with injured players. The thing that worries me about Mike is that his role is not going to be appreciated the way it is as far as prevention. Although he is working with injured players and he's taking them back to excel beyond the level of performance they came into with an injury, our world has to get better at preventing injury. Every parent I talk to, it's like, oh, my kid's going to have Tommy John anyway. A lot of people in professional baseball that I've communicated with, and I really want to go in there and dig in and help them with their injury problems. They just think it's the cost of doing business. It's not, in their mind, it's not a matter of, will it ever happen? It's like, when? So I'm telling you, Mike is phenomenal. I got to get him to speak. I know I've talked a little bit about him. I'm telling you, he's the secret weapon for me. If you're watching my stuff and listening to me, he gives me a lot of great insight. So, Mike, I want to, introduce you obviously to what you're doing, but I want people to kind of know your background and story and, the new business concept that you have.
Okay. Yeah. My name's Mike Killian. I actually started out as a software engineer. Well, actually, been playing baseball since I was 5 years old. I was being recruited by the Cincinnati Reds. Unfortunately, I got into a car accident, so it literally ended my career before it ever started. And it's kind of wild because that got me into what I do now. After that, when I recovered from it, and back then, I mean, there was no PT type stuff. I mean, the orthopedic surgeon basically released me and said, have at it. And so I went out, play catch with my brother, and, he's 20, 30 feet in front of me, and I went to throw the ball and it went sideways. I'm like, I'm done. I knew what was going to take to get back. And I just said, I'm done. So I signed on with first Southwestern Bell, which is now fully AT&T. And then from there, I went to IBM as a software engineer doing data replication. It was myself and one other guy that basically had the entire world. I mean, I had the U.S., Canada, and Asia. And since he was in Europe, he had the rest of the world. And so I literally traveled every single week, and it was great, monetarily wise and all that. But, in the meantime, we're popping out kids right and left. And, 5 kids later, my wife's saying, hey, this isn't working. Plus, all my kids started to get into sports. And so I said, is it better to do what I'm doing or now be their advocate? And so I basically stepped away from that, consulting from home, and started getting into the athletic world. And part of that, and I kind of went into the back end of it. My daughter had ACL tears, one her junior year in high school, one her junior year in college in basketball. My wife's had 2. And so, I had to do my own recovery on my shoulder. I mean, I basically shattered my shoulder blade, and they had 4-inch long screws and to hold my rotator back together. So I learned to do rehab for that. I've done the rehabs for all my kids and my wife. And so I kind of got in, towards the back end of it is learning how the body operates and how to get them back to what the sport they were doing.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. And Mike's got this art and science component, which is really good. And I think you need to have that, and what I think about is evidence-based return to performance, right? We need to know what the baselines are for our athletes before they get hurt. And then during the rehabilitation process, we need to have the benchmarks to know when they're cleared or when they're, ready for higher demand. So, Mike, can you share a little bit about what armcare.com, what it's done for, your current practice?
Yeah, well, and it's actually, it's been unbelievable. Always in the past, it's kind of one of those that I knew what to do, and but there was nothing, no gauge. So basically, what I would do is, especially like with pitchers, is we'd work at something for a couple weeks, and I'd say, okay, let's test it. And so we'd start to throw, and their discomfort or weakness or and say, okay, well, let's back off and go back into the backing off the recovery part. What arm care has now allowed me to do is, and now I take my actual recovery piece, the stuff I do to actually get the arm better. I've literally wrapped arm care around it. Mm-hmm. Before I do, the first thing I'll do is kind of do a base test with them with all the typical tools. Then I also use arm care to say, hey, where is this guy at right now? Does he have deficiencies? Is the scap working correctly?
Yeah.
And so, so there I start there, and then I go through the test, and then I literally go into the, my recovery piece, which is a lot of using connection ball and a training sock. Yep. And then what I'll do after that is then go into a post exam to say, hey, did we decline? How much did I lose in strength? And then from that point on, then we'll go back in and actually do the full workout through arm care.
Yep, that's amazing.
I'll actually do that for 2 or 3 weeks, until we see that the numbers are staying there. Then I'll start adding in other programming. I'll start to work on the lower body or whatever, which caused that injury to happen.
Now, a lot of the people we talk to in the baseball world are very protected, don't want to share a lot because I get it. It's a business. Mike's going to go into deep detail on some case studies, and we're going to present one today where he used our device and evaluated a player. And this player was a landscaper on the side, in a common world, as a paying customer, he's working with Mike, they come in the door, and most coaches are not going to appreciate the physical nature of what this athlete does every day. And they might come in on a day where they've done a ton of landscape work, heavy manual lifting, nervous system's fried, all of a sudden they show up at the location. It's like, hey, we're doing a weighted ball program. You're going to do 12 running guns today. These are the ball weights. And then we're going to do, X, Y, and Z, super high intensity. Mike, being this evidence-based, performance specialist, he is now going to a point where he's like, today we need to do recovery. And he's also really given this athlete some insight in terms of pivoting and how he's doing his pre-work from his training. But what I'm going to say before I turn over to Mike, and he's going to lay out what he's been doing with this athlete, how he's getting him back to health, is that this particular kid, under Mike's command, has produced strength results that are incredible. And I will tell you, I've been looking at dynamometry data for the throwing arm since 2010. So we're coming on 12 years. It's the strongest arm I've ever seen, hands down. We look at relative strength to body weight. So as a percentage, so we want to see our athletes get to 70% in total arm strength in pounds relative to the pounds of body weight. Okay. This particular kid we're going to talk about He's gone through a shoulder injury surgery, and he posted a 111. That means his arm strength was stronger than his body weight. Okay, this is incredible. I've never seen it in my life. So I'm sending it over to Mike, and Mike, just kind of walk us through, man, an initial assessment that you looked at with this athlete, the communication, the process, where you're going to be taking this, the objectives, the evaluations.
Okay. It basically started out, I mean, he was in Montana in minor league ball, and basically, texting me and sending me videos saying that, his arm was killing him, that his velocity was starting to drop. And so I literally said, okay, take your shirt off and do a couple different tests where you're raising your arm, because he said all of it was in the backside of his shoulder. Okay, so I basically told him, to almost like a jumping jack, where you take your hands lateral and go up over your head, while at the same time having somebody video it. And when he did that, I mean, I didn't have to go any further. I mean, I saw that he's a left-hander, and I saw that his left scap was probably 2 or 3 inches below his right scap. And so I got back on the phone with him, and I said, I go, Cody, you got to stop. He goes, what do you mean stop? I said, you got to quit throwing. I said, you've got scapular dyskinesia, and if you keep throwing, you're going to blow up the shoulder. And he goes, I can't, coach, I can't. They'll release me. And I'm like, okay, let's see if we can. So I gave him a whole exercise routine, but I knew in the back of my mind it wasn't going to go good, because you have to stop. And of course he didn't. It blew it up. He finished the season, but he didn't pitch a whole lot. He came back in the fall, and so the first thing we tried to do was re-strengthen it. We got it to the point where there was no pain, but he still felt it. So I sent him to one of the Cardinals orthopedic surgeons, and of course he had a labrum tear, posterior labrum tear. So that pretty much stopped everything we were doing. He had surgery. He came back probably 2 months after that, and then we started our return to throwing, which everybody gets once that. So what I did was immediately put him on arm care, so made him do the fresh exam prep work, do the fresh exam, which wasn't bad. I think it was probably in the 80s, so it was over the minimum. And then we did our return to throwing, in which the very first session is, you're throwing at 20 and 35 feet, 10 throws at 20 feet and 25 or 35 for 2 sets.
Okay. I kind of want to ask you, from the time that he had surgery, how long did it take for you to reintegrate throwing?
Of course, when you go to through the Cardinals orthopedics, they send you to, a PT. So I didn't see him through the entire PT. He came back to me when they said it was time to start the return to throwing, even though he was still going to that PT.
Okay, cool. Keep going.
Okay. And so, and he felt discomfort. I mean, it wasn't, pain, but he, he's a sharp athlete, knows his body really well. So he could say, hey, it doesn't feel good. I mean, I can feel my shoulder moving around as he's throwing. And, that was only 2 sets. So then we got into the post-exam, and it crashed. Really bad.
Big fatigue. Fatigue.
Big time fatigue. So when I started questioning him, saying, Cody, we didn't do that much. What's going on? So they come to find out that he was just at PT 2 hours before he got there. I'm doing PT 3 or 4 days a week. I go, oh man. I said, you can't do both in a day. Matter of fact, we need to try to schedule your PT at the end of the week when we're done with our 3 throwing sessions.
Perfect. See, I got to stop you right there. I'm sorry. For the people who are listening, this is the way the world needs to work for pitchers. Ultimate communication, the way the tool is being used, is that Mike diagnosed this kid's fatigue. In a lot of like our mentality, Mike, and you probably test people in the industry, is more is better. More is better. He's weak, do more. and you're realizing with this stringent testing protocol, here's somebody, and I believe pitching coaches are the gateway to health in baseball, not the medical staff, not the strength staff. The pitching coaches have the most violent activity that a baseball player can do, right? Number one predictor of pitching injuries is pitching. It's not, you're not doing it in the weight room, it's throwing. And the way he used this is he communicated to other stakeholders and create an appropriate schedule, and need people to understand that. Use the tool to have effective communication. Back to you, Mike.
Okay. So, once he saw that, his first thing is, well, can I just do the test on a Monday after I'm on the weekend? I'm like, no, we've got to do this every day. I said, otherwise we're not going to know where you're at. And so I convinced him that he went back to his PT, and now the PT was literally being done on the weekend.
Yep.
So we had a full week of throwing. He'd have 2 days of rest from his last PT session. And when we went that route, his numbers really started to climb. And he didn't have fatigue. Actually, his post-throwing was usually higher than his fresh exam.
See, okay, got to stop you there. You see, the way Mike is describing his return to throwing programs, this is what needs to happen all over. Professional baseball, got to happen. Got to assess the strength after. And he's seeing a very remarkable benefit of his work, because when you are training an athlete, you're designing a program, you want to see minimized fatigue after throwing. That's because he's creating an appropriate amount of fatigue to develop the capacity going into this high intensity training session. And now this athlete's neurological system is actually getting potentiated. I've seen that in some of my work, some of my academic work, and some of my professional work. There's a certain subset of athletes, when you hit the training right, when you hit the workload right, they're coming out of these sessions activated, and this is what Mike does. He's not breaking kids down, he's building them up. So go ahead, Mike, keep going, man.
Okay. So it was climbing through the week. Through the roof. And then he came to me and said, Coach, I'm going to start doing some lawn care, to make money on the side. And I'm like, oh gosh, you can't say no. Either that or, I have to pay him. And, so I said, okay, we'll monitor it closely. Well, he started that, on a Monday. And that very night he came in, and even the fresh exam was a disaster. The numbers were way low, and we still went through everything. He started feeling the pain again, or the discomfort. And so I went to him and I said, Cody, the landscape is not going to work. Either that or, you're not going to play baseball. The recovery's just not going to get there. And, and if we don't get that shoulder, you'll get to a point where it's permanent. And so it took another day, and of course he went back to the same thing. Well, can we just test on Monday? And I'm like, no, Cody, it's not how it works. It's the only way for me to get you back to major league level is we've got to push this.
Yep.
And so he spent a couple of days. He worked literally the rest of that week, and he literally quit lawn care. And then since then, in the 2 weeks since he's quit, he went from 45 feet at 50% effort on 71 miles an hour.
Nice.
A week later, he was up to 77 miles an hour at 50% effort.
So yeah, I want to stop you right there. Okay. When you talk about percent effort of throwing, it's interesting because there's been a few studies to look at how throwing athletes estimate their effort and what actually comes out in velocity. So I'm telling you why this is so impressive is that the typical athlete that throws 90 miles an hour, right? When they go about 50%, that's usually about 75 miles an hour, like what you're saying, right? And that sort of equates to, you add to the 100%, that's generally around 90. Okay. So there's almost a 25 mile per hour increase on their percentage at 50. When you get to the point where guys throwing 77, we're talking about this kid, we're talking about an arm that's been broken, and he's already estimate a 25% increase at 100% from his 75% effort subjectively. He's 25% on that. He's 92 miles an hour with an arm coming back from a slap tear. This is kind of the ridiculousness. I'm not saying ridiculous in a bad way of what Mike brings to the table. We're talking about an athlete who 50%, this is something that we need to do in the return to performance process. You're also seeing that Mike's putting a number to everything, not just throwing a kid out there and say, hey, 50%, throw 50% today at 45 feet and you're turning your back on him. Mike's there. He's assessing. He's looking at any kind of, abnormalities in velocity, increases or decreases. I mean, he's matching these performance outcomes to functional outcomes. This is kind of where the world has to go. The difference is Mike's doing this in one person. Mike, talk to me, from here too.
Okay. So, and of course, I reached out to you this, because our post test were better than the fresh exam, and after talking to you, so what we started doing and to get from that 71 to 77 is we said, hey, let's start pushing it a little harder because we're obviously not fatiguing, and so we can, because of, for a while in every athlete there, once you're injured, you're always worried, is that next throw gonna blow up again?
Yep.
And the great thing about arm care is it's showing us that we can keep pushing that envelope. And that's literally how we got from 71 to 77 in a week was our post test was better than our fresh exam for that day. So we kept pushing the envelope. So,
nice.
You get into the third set and, we'd go from, he'd start out maybe, 60 miles an hour. And by the time we got to the third set, he was pushing it into the 70.
Nice.
And then we would take the post test and it was still higher.
Yep.
So we're going to continue, we jump up to 45 and 60 feet next week. And so we're going to continue to push that while we're doing the monitoring. Make sure that our fatigue level stays away.
Perfect. So, I want to wrap this up in a couple minutes because I need to get our listeners to really focus on this. They don't have to pay attention for very long. But with this particular athlete in a couple minutes, can you talk to us about, the next benchmarks? He talked about a distance, what are some of the training benchmarks that you're looking for and the things that you're projecting kind of from here out to getting on the field, in a general overview? You don't have to
when you go through the return to throwing, there's three different phases that the orthopedics give you. You got the first stage, which is doing 2 sets for 2 days, or the rest day, and then you go to 3 sets, and then you start climbing back distances. Once we get to 90 feet, now we add in, we can now get onto the mound, and you first do a couple weeks of just fastballs, and then you do a couple weeks where you start adding in a change up, and then we get into the long toss, and so we'll continue to do that and wrap arm care around it, make sure and to do the workouts with arm care, because based on your test, arm care actually builds the workout for you. Mm-hmm. Once we get through the first stage where we can, once we get on the mound, now I'm going to go into basically relearning how for him to use his lower body, because that was one of the things that probably caused the issues to begin with. He was jumping out and didn't have a stable lower half.
Yep.
So the great thing, it's, I guess not a great thing, but what I have found, at least once you get somebody with an injury, most of them, they allow you to basically reprogram.
Yep. Yes.
Whereas a lot of pitchers that I get come in and they say, hey, I want to up this, and they don't have any issues. They don't want to change anything.
Yep.
They say, well, this is the way I've always done. Go, well, that way's not working, is it? Otherwise you wouldn't be here.
Yep. So this is a good kind of end to this segment, so Mike, now he's taking the realm of, the communication level to influence players, and exactly what he's saying, like, you got to legitimize what you're asking them to do. A lot of players, it's baseball. They're grown up in data. It's inherent to them. So, using this piece with our technology and showing them, your arm strength is suffering. We need to look at making a mechanical change so that your post strength goes up. These are some ways in which we can lead the athlete, and he's right. Mike's right. Sometimes you just got to wait for them to fail. You gotta learn the learner, and you got to come in at the right time. But, Mike's now got an evidence-based process and a database process, influenced a player that, obviously needs to make money, was a landscaper, was able to communicate to this athlete with the data to get into his psychology about, now I got to shift. Now I got to really focus on, my arm health, my functioning of my arm. I got to make baseball a priority. These are some sacrifices I need to make, through a person like this. So this wraps up this segment. We're going to get into another one. Stay tuned.